Hi, I will be with you in just 1 second. I'm just setting up Periscope because we are going to be simultaneously live broadcasting on both Periscope and on Facebook Live today. So welcome everybody. I know it's going to take a little while for people to come in, so I'm going to talk just for a few minutes in the knowledge that this broadcast will be put on YouTube afterwards and available for everybody to look at there. And so I'm going to talk even though there probably aren't that many people with us at the moment. Okay, so welcome to this broadcast which we're doing live for the wonderful blog Letting the Light In, which is a resource that's available for parents and family members of those struggling with addiction. And sorry about that, something flashed up on my screen. And it's a resource that's available there that's been written by a parent who's actually been through this process and is going through this process of having an addict in their family that they are working with. And this parent has been lucky to have the resources to be able to really learn about addiction, and their child has had the experience of rehab, and they are giving back to the wider community in the knowledge that not everybody does have those resources to send their child to rehab or to hire private counsellors and all of that kind of stuff. And the first thing I want to say to you is that although rehab and private counselling can be enormously important in helping somebody get into recovery or stay in recovery, and today's theme is going to be relapse, there are resources in the community in the UK and in other countries that are free resources that are available for everybody to access. And one of those wonderful sources of support is are the 12-step programs, and there are many 12-step programs that address every kind of addiction, and also importantly, as this is a blog for parents, that are there to support parents. And the one that people may have heard of is Al-Anon, and there are other ones out there, and there are charities as well that work in this field. Like in the UK, we have Drug Fam, which is a fantastic charity. So I'm just going to pull up my little list today that I have of things that we might like to cover. And just so you know, for those of you who haven't been part of one of these broadcasts today, and I expect that's probably quite a few of you, how it works is that I'm going to be with you for about 50 minutes, well, exactly 50 minutes in fact. I'm going to finish with you at 11:50 my time here in Los Angeles. Hi, Letting the Light In joining us. I'm going to be with you at be with you until 11:50 my time, which I believe is 7:50 in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure there are other people joining from around the world. I'm available to answer any questions that anybody has joining me. I'm aware, and this is very important, that this isn't a confidential forum, being social media. So if you want to ask a question that's specifically about your child or your situation and you want to remain anonymous, if you don't have an anonymous email, then obviously don't send it from your personal email or from your personal Periscope account, etc. But you can actually email us in advance of these broadcasts to sarahgrahamsolutions@gmail.com. That's Sarah with an H, Graham, Graham, solutions@gmail.com. And we're doing these broadcasts about once a month. We've had a little bit of a gap because it's been the summer and I've been working on a creative project here in Los Angeles, but we aim to do these once a month. So please check in with the Letting the Light In Twitter account, and you can check my Facebook page, Sarah Graham Solutions Facebook page, for regular updates about when we're doing the next one. And obviously if you send me an email today, I'm already juggling Periscope and Facebook Live, so I'm not also going to be able to read emails coming in today, but we will answer those questions next time. So okay, we wanted to talk about relapse today because probably everybody who has anything to do with addiction, who's been affected by addiction in any way, knows that relapse is part of the process. And it really is. I mean, the thing I urge anybody who's coming to this situation and not really thinking that they know very much about it is addiction works in very similar ways across all of the different addictions, be it addiction to cigarettes or addiction to crack cocaine or addiction to food or sex or gambling or shopping or exercise or love addiction. Any of the ways that the disease of addiction can manifest in an individual's life the process can be very similar in terms of you go through a cycle of change, as some researchers have called it, in terms of your ability to look at the situation clearly, to have the motivation to want to change, and to take that action to change. And relapse is part of that process for many people. Most people don't use a substance, be it alcohol, have a couple of bad things happen, and then just think, okay, that's it, I'm going to stop, and then never do it again. And unless they're absolutely not an addict and the thing was so severe, like driving under the influence and losing their license, that might be enough of a wake-up call, say, for a student in college to decide not to drink again. It just doesn't mix with them. But for anybody who has an addiction, and an addiction is defined as a situation where somebody experiences powerlessness over the use, that they have awareness that there's a problem and they want to stop, but they experience what we call powerlessness, which is they say that they're never going to do it again, and then it happens and they're kind of shocked or surprised that it's happened again. Whether there's been an increase in tolerance, which has meant that the person's had to use more and more of the thing or the activity to get the same effect, that it stops working in the same way, so that the quantities are going up, or the time that they're having to spend in the gym to get the same high from the exercise is getting bigger and bigger, and it's starting to impact their work. Whatever it is, we're seeing tolerance increasing, loss of control, accumulating what we call damages or consequences, you might hear people sometimes say. All of those are indicators that there's an addiction going on. And in terms of being a brain-based disease, we've actually got a good evidence base now that really can identify what's going on in the brain, and that some people definitely have a genetic predisposition towards addiction. Addiction does run in families. Doesn't mean that if you are an addict and you have a child, that your child is definitely going to be an addict. That's certainly not the case. Or that if you've got a grandparent who's had this illness, that you're definitely going to get this illness. It's not that kind of it doesn't run quite so clearly through families, but we know that there is a family link. And we also know that the other main thing that drives addiction, and some people think it actually is the thing that switches addiction on in the genes, is trauma. And trauma can be many things, and what is one person's trauma may be another person's excitement and fun. So again, that is very much an individual thing, what that trauma is. But anyway, getting back to the point of relapse is very much part of this process in the sense that people will make decisions that they're not going to do something, and then it happens again. And we talk about addiction being a progressive illness, and this is very much part and parcel of that, in terms of the seriousness and the consequences of the relapse getting bigger and bigger as well. So that as the illness progresses, the stakes get higher and higher, and the person might imagine, and the family might imagine, that the stakes are now so high in terms of consequences that of course the person's not going to do this again, because it would be crazy. And yet they do it again. And I also want to make a distinction between a lapse and relapse. I think this is very important. I use this distinction in my therapeutic practice, and actually rewind. I should probably introduce myself a little bit. I'm Sarah Graham, and I am an addiction therapist in Europe, and I'm currently living in Los Angeles. I've been a qualified addiction therapist since 2005, and I'm also a person who's in recovery 20 years. 20 years? No, that's a lie. I've been in recovery 15 years, but I had 20 years of active addiction from the age of 12 to the age of 32. So that's what qualifies me to do this work. And just in terms of my own personal story, my drinking started at 12 years old, and my drug taking started at 14. And I'll give you one example of the way that relapse can work. And I actually want to break relapse down today and talk about it in quite a complex way, because it's not quite as straightforward as some people might imagine. So this might kind of open this up a little bit. So when I was 14 years old, I started using the drug speed, proper name amphetamine, and within 6 months of using that drug, I hit an enormous physical rock bottom. I had been snorting this powder. It's a very acidic feeling, very toxic to the sinal passages substance, and I wasn't doing vast quantities of it. I was only 14 years old, but I was doing a couple of lines and staying up all night, and then experiencing the horrible effects of that in terms of missing a night's sleep, obviously missing school, starting to drop out of school, and then the Christmas of that year, which is 1984, that tells you how old I am. The Christmas of that year, I experienced a really awful sinal infection. I mean, disgusting sinal infection in terms of the stuff coming out of me, and in terms of how my head felt. My head felt like it was in a vice. And I swore, I can remember laying on the bedroom floor and swearing on my life and praying to a God that I didn't really believe in at that point, please, please, please get me through this experience. I will never, ever do it again. I will never sniff another drug. I will never do this again. This is so horrible. Please let me survive this. Please take the pain away. And I didn't touch another line of speed after that once I recovered, and I didn't sniff another drug as I promised for many years until so that was about 1984. But 10 years later, I think, in 1994, that awareness and that memory and that kind of horrible experience I'd been through went completely out of my head, because I hadn't done any kind of treatment around my addiction. My addiction kept changing shape, so I didn't spot it. It went, through a drug addiction, into an exercise addiction, into a food addiction, into a bit of a sex addiction while I was at university. It kept changing shape, and it never got bad enough in any one area for me to truly address it in terms of doing... Well, I did some therapy, but I didn't see an addiction therapist. And one thing I would say to parents who are looking to seek therapy for their child, or therapy for themselves, and that's another thing that we'll talk about today, the importance of family members actually doing therapeutic work and the family getting into recovery. You may be powerless over what the actual addict is doing, but you as an individual and you as a family, the rest of your family, you can do or do work on yourself. Anyway, sorry, I'm going to jump around a little bit today. Partly that's the way my brain works, and partly I'm a little bit tired today, so I hope that you can bear with me, and I will cover all the things that we need to cover in the course of this 50 minutes. Anyway, so jump forward from 1984 to 1994. I'm in a media club. I've graduated from college. I've got a dream job. I'm with a group of peers that I feel very kind of intimidated by and very less than. I have a couple of glasses of champagne, which is a drink I'm not used to drinking at this point, so it's all very exciting and glamorous. And I get asked to go to the toilet by the presenter of the radio show I'm working on, by the presenter's girlfriend. I go to the toilet with them, thinking we're just going on a girls' trip to the toilet, and they produce cocaine. They produce cocaine and offer me a line. And in that second, slightly drunk, all of that awareness that I'd had, all of those promises I'd made, went out the window. I did that line, and my addiction to substances, in terms of stimulant substances that you snort, was off again. I didn't experience the physical consequences that I'd experienced with speed immediately. I certainly didn't get the sinal infection thing, and so that from that year I had another 7. Sorry, I'm not very good at counting years. Hang on. So that was that was 1994, 6, 7, 8. Another 7 years of addiction from that point forward, in terms of active addiction of using very harmful substances. Believe me, there is no safe way to snort a drug. The lining of your sinuses is not designed to be snorting substances. And I say that as if it's a surprising thing, and addicts may not think about that. Of course, if you've never thought about snorting a drug, that's probably obvious to you. Anyway, so I've just got a little list here, and I'm going to go through it. I am hoping that some of you will ask me some questions. None seem to have come through yet. I don't know if that means that my technology is not working correctly. Okay, oh great, we have got a question. What are the early warning signs of a potential relapse? Okay, well, first of all, before we can talk about a potential relapse, we need to talk about clean time and what getting clean means. Okay, and this is a very important one, because I think oftentimes when families realize that their child has an addiction, they see one substance or they see one behavior that is the clear and present danger. Maybe it's cannabis. That's quite often the one with teenagers. So they see that their teenager has started to smoke cannabis. Families have different attitudes to that based on their own personal experience with that drug. I would say to everybody watching this broadcast, especially American watchers of this broadcast, as parents, you need to really bring yourself up to speed about cannabis and the effects of cannabis, and not rely on the data that you may have collected at college when you were a student yourself, because cannabis today is not the cannabis that it used to be. It's an entirely different substance. It's much stronger and much more harmful in terms of its effect. Anyway, getting back to the point. So you may see that your young person is using a substance and it is starting to affect their behavior, and the signs that you might be seeing are a sudden drop in motivation, a sudden lack of engagement with other peers, a sudden lack of engagement in terms of interest in hobbies or activities that have formerly been important, a kind of whittling away of different things that used to be part of your child's picture, so that they seem to be spending less and less time doing that, and more time getting up to stuff that you don't know what they're up to, maybe isolating in their bedroom or isolating with particular friends that may not be the friends that they used to hang out with. I mean, I'm not going to go into all of the individual signs. I really strongly urge you to Google any of these topics that I hit on today. And for example, if you have any questions about drugs and drug effects, Talk to Frank. www.talktofrank is a very good resource. That's a UK resource, but it has some excellent information. Okay, so you notice that the person has got this problem, and in the early stages, parents often address that issue quite firmly with a young person, and maybe that kind of conversation, and maybe the threat of punishment, or maybe a letter from the school, or maybe a suspension or something like that, has the desired effect in terms of waking the young person up and making them realize that something's got to change, that this isn't a sustainable position, and that there are going to be very real consequences. So maybe they stop doing that. But the first thing I need to say to you is that addiction is let's use the metaphor of a tree. Addiction is a tree that has many branches. The roots are all the same in terms of shame and trauma and genetic predisposition, and wanting to control feelings. So the roots are kind of the same, but there are many different branches to the tree. And so you may, as a parent, successfully cut off one of those branches in terms of shut down the supply of money, shut down the using opportunities, whatever it is. And so you may think that your young person is clean and so that they have moved away from their addiction. And if it isn't an addiction, if it's just a substance use issue, you might have literally nipped it in the bud, and that's fantastic. However, it's important for you as parents to understand the wide-ranging nature of addiction, because if it is an addiction, the young person at that point, when you've shut one door, may just open another door. Sorry, all the metaphors are coming out today. May just open another door, so they may start using alcohol instead of using cannabis, or they may start using food. Certain foods like sugary foods, white foods with sugar and white flour especially, can have a very psychoactive effect on the brain in terms of numbing. You can get we all know about the sugar high, but for an addict, that sugar high can be a really powerful thing, especially if they binge on sugar. So the person may just, what we call, cross addict from one thing to another. So you may think that you've got somebody who's clean and who is fine now, but actually, unless they've done some work on themselves and addressed why it was that they were using that substance in a way that was being harmful to them and harmful to other people as well, then they are going to look for another fix. And it is a fix. And when we talk about fix, it is literally fixing the feelings that they're feeling that are uncomfortable feelings, and looking for a way to control feelings that they don't want to feel. Addiction, at its base, in terms of a very simple answer about addiction, people often say, what is addiction? Well, in one word, addiction is about control. It's about controlling the things that you don't want to feel and helping yourself to feel things that you do want to feel. Anyway, letting the light in, that question, I will answer it more specifically. So, for example, if you do have somebody, who identified that they had a problem, say that they had a problem with alcohol, that they needed to stop drinking completely, that they'd already gone through the process of relapse in terms of the horse trading that can go on. For me, what that looked like was I started as a teenager drinking rough, scrumpy cider because I lived in Wiltshire, and then I kind of moved through lots of different substances. Towards the end of my drinking, I was drinking mainly wine and things like that. But then having lots of shots of things. So when I started identifying that drink might be a problem, I started changing what I was drinking and kind of trying to just drink beer or just drink wine and not do any shots, and then realizing that, as AA says, one is too many and 1,000 never enough. So that if I took that first drink, and it really didn't matter whether it was a small glass of white wine or a triple shot of vodka from the freezer, it all led to the same place, which was a loss of control. And that loss of control happens because it's literally like lighting the touch paper in your head. It's literally like lighting the touch paper in your head, and the chain reaction starts and you're off again. So anyway, so say you've got a young person or an older person who has managed to get sober and stay sober for a little while, and if they're doing that, the first thing I would say about that is, as an addict or an alcoholic, and I actually see alcoholics as addicts, and I think it's the same, when we talk about alcoholism, it's the same illness, that person may be able to get sober by willpower alone. And a lot of the people I work with as a professional addiction therapist, and a lot of the people I know as my personal friends, and a lot of people I've met in the recovery rooms of the 12-step fellowships out there, are very self-willed people, often incredibly intelligent people, often very sensitive, creative, wonderful people who may be able to accomplish great things in many of their areas of their lives, may be able to run a corporation or be an international movie star or pop star, and really seem to have their stuff together. I was going to swear, no, I won't. But they don't have it together in the area of the addiction, and that is because they're battling an area of their own brain called the amygdala, the old reptilian area of the brain, which is more powerful than the prefrontal cortex area of the brain. Anyway, so in terms of potential warning signs that that person is going to pick up a drink again, well, I would say to you as a family member, if you see somebody who has gone on the wagon, I mean, that's the big one that people do with alcohol, isn't it? They swear off, they say they're going on the wagon, and they're not going to drink again because it does them no good and all of that kind of stuff. Well, that's great, and some people might be able to stop drinking for good if they're not an alcoholic by willpower alone. I would say to you that actually those people who seem to do it on their own quite often have actually cross-addicted to something else. There's some other thing going on in the background, rather than actually completely addressing the illness, if they do have this illness. But that person, you will notice big behavior change in that person when they get sober, obviously, and some of that will be positive, but some of it will seem to be very negative. When a young person stops smoking cannabis, they may have been angry before and difficult to manage before, and very moody and kind of very up and down and all of that kind of stuff. When they put the substance down, you may experience emotions that are off the scale, and that's because, as I said, when the person's in active addiction, they've been suppressing all of those negative feelings they don't want to feel. They've been managing the symptoms, and that's why the substances can feel so important to the addict, because it actually feels like the thing that's keeping them going, that's keeping at bay those dark thoughts, maybe, that's managing the depression or the anxiety. Oftentimes social anxiety is a big part of addiction. Depression is often a big part of addiction. So oftentimes those symptoms will come back with a vengeance when the person puts down the substance. I'm still desperately trying to answer this question in terms of things you can look for. So you will see behavior change. Maybe you will notice that the person starts talking about the substance a lot, that they're having what we call euphoric recall. Now, when you go into a residential rehab environment, people are actually banned from talking about they're using in any way that's positive. Kind of any of that kind of reminiscing, I remember when I was back in the Ministry of Sound and they were playing this track and we were dancing, or I remember meeting this girl and we went and we scored some coke and we went off and did this, and telling those kind of stories. All of that stuff is banned because it's euphoric recall. It actually sets off the fantasy and the mental obsession, which leads back to actually doing that stuff again in reality. So you may notice a change in their thinking, and you may notice obsessive cycling in the mind, maybe out loud, maybe on the phone to their friends, maybe texting or going on social media, maybe in terms of their browser history, starting to look at things, and they may say that they're just doing research to find out what it was, or they may come up with excuses for why they're focusing on whatever it was that they were doing, but often that's because they're going back into the mindset of addiction. You may notice a deterioration in their mental health. You may notice an increase in their anxiety, in their stress, their stress level. You may notice a disengagement from things which they had started to re-engage with, in terms of a young person who's actually put down cannabis and is now going back to school properly, getting there on time, starting to perform again, and then you start to notice that behaviour starts to slide. Honesty is a huge thing. Hi Anne, welcome, nice to see you. Honesty is a huge part of the recovery process. In the early stages of recovery, one of the first tools that's given to people is HOW, which stands for honesty, open-mindedness and willingness. And honesty is integral to recovery, because addiction is based on dishonesty, and that's part and parcel of the denial process. You may have heard people talking about the denial process. Well, what that is it's the denial process exists in all humans, addicts and non-addicts, and it's part of the way that we have survived in a very dangerous world. If you think about it historically, if we go back to Stone Age people living in their caves, they would go out into the world to hunt huge scary animals, and which was necessary for their survival, and some of their friends might die, they might experience an injury, all of that kind of stuff, and yet the next day or a few days later they as a tribe have got to get back out there and do it again. Well, the denial process is the way that we forget the really horrible things, and we push them away, and we just focus on the good things, in that case the desire to eat meat and survive, and that enables us to get back out there and carry on. So the denial process is is a big part of how the brain protects itself and manages anxiety and dealing with being in an unsafe world. So it has healthy roots, but in addiction, obviously that survival mechanism becomes very dysfunctional, because the person does things. Sorry, you can probably hear my dog in the background, I apologise. Scotty, stop it. Lie down. So that natural process becomes warped, and so the person may do something really horrible to themselves or to another person, and yet be able to deny it to themselves and deny it to other people. And that dishonesty is an endemic part of this illness, and it's something that is something that, when we talk about recovery being one day at a time, it really is one day at a time, in terms of the behaviour change that's necessary every day, and working a programme of recovery every day to actively work on staying sober, staying clean, staying away from whatever the illness was that you'd manifested. And that involves all sorts of things, and one of those things is self-reflection and self-honesty, and also sharing with other people and checking things out with other people, because that process of denial, that process of dishonesty can be active even if you're many years sober. I've experienced times when I've been shocked myself, in terms of I see something one way, and then another person, maybe somebody I really love, sees it another way, and so it's a process. So anyway, sorry, I'm being a little bit verbose today, and partly I'm being so verbose because we're not getting that many questions in, and I want to make sure that we cover a lot of ground for everybody who's watching this now and who's going to watch it on YouTube later. But yeah, honesty, you may hopefully, as parents or as people who are looking after a young person, have a relationship with that person where you are able to build trust and honesty again, even if they have acted badly and done things which have been very upsetting to the family. I think it's really important that that the channels of communication are kept open as much as possible, and that the young person feels able to share. Having said that, though, that you will notice when the addiction is becoming active again that the level of honesty will diminish, and that you might start catching the young person out in terms, and it could be just white lies at first, but those lies build. You know, the addiction likes to have little things tucked away that it can work with and kind of spin and build, because, you know, the small lies can build into bigger lies, which can build into bigger justifications and ultimately lead to the lie that, oh no, I'm not going to use, and no, I'm not going to spend this money that grandma gave me on drugs, and then that money gets spent, and the next thing you know, you've got a high drunk person in your house again saying, I don't know how this happened. Well, actually, all relapse happens a long time before it actually happens. It's very rare that a relapse happens completely spontaneously, and the person may think it was a completely spontaneous relapse in that they didn't see it coming. They suddenly find themselves in a party with a beer in their hand instead of the, you know, the glass of Coke or whatever they'd had previously, and drinking it. And then you know, there's a lovely story in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, this is the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which you can get from any AA meeting, and you can also buy it online. And there's some lovely stories in here about addiction, which really explain it very well. And there's a story in there about a guy who successfully puts his alcohol issue to bed, gets back into work, is being successful again, goes out to lunch, and he's just chatting with people, having a nice time, eating his sandwich, and then okay, I'll come back to that in a second. Thank you, Lesson Lighting. And then he finds that the third drink, he just spontaneously orders a whiskey and pops it into his milk. I think he's drinking. This is the 40s or 30s in America. And then he has 2 or 3, and then the next thing he's hammering on the bar saying, how did this happen? And it's true to say that that relapse can happen spontaneously if somebody puts themselves in dangerous places, and that's actually another thing that you can look out for. If somebody previously has really respected their recovery and maybe turned down invites to going to parties that felt unsafe to them, or have been saying no to hanging out with friends that they used to use with, or, you know, maybe ended a relationship with a girlfriend or a boyfriend because that person wasn't a good person for them, and so maybe they welcome that person back into their life, restart a relationship that was an unhealthy relationship, start hanging out with people again that they previously swore that they weren't going to hang out with, or, you know, maybe took a job that was a job that they previously said they wouldn't do, and you know, so there are all sorts of different signs like that. Okay, moving on. Time is of the essence. What can a family do to support somebody who is in relapse? Well, the first thing I would say to you, and you may have deduced this already, in terms of relapse being part of the process of recovery. And one of the things which I think is really important to take away from today is, just because somebody you love has relapsed doesn't mean that they're not going to make it into recovery and that they can't be successful in getting clean. I know that can be very difficult to believe when you have somebody who has relapsed multiple times. And in America, where I live at the moment, Los Angeles is my home, here they have literally hundreds of rehabs, and I encounter some people who've been through rehab multiple times and still not successfully stayed sober. And quite often those people really feel despair and feel that it's absolutely impossible for them to get clean, that they feel that their family's thrown so much money at the situation, that they've spent so much time in safe environments and they haven't managed to stay sober. Maybe they've got physical damage or psychological damage, or you know, their relationships are in pieces, or they've got a criminal record, or their credit history is blown to smithereens. Whatever, they come to somebody like me feeling really hopeless. And if that person's feeling hopeless and they've got the denial process protecting them families often are just literally tearing their hair out, and their hearts are in pieces by this stage. And I know that it's very tempting for some people to just think, that's it, I'm done, I'm not having anything to do with this family member, I'm ending this marriage, I'm kicking this person out, and that's it, I'm not having anything to do with them. And you know what, for you as an individual, especially if it's a marriage, maybe that is the right thing for you. Maybe you have experienced so much trauma already that you do need to cut ties, and you do need to do the healing work yourself, and to end that marriage. And in some cases, actually, that can be the biggest gift to the addict. And in some cases, the family putting the young person out of the home, either into some kind of care environment. In the UK we have the state care system. Sometimes families have to eject the addict from the home because their behaviour is affecting the siblings so much, and they're causing so much trauma and so much upset that it's affecting other children's schooling and well-being, and that's the right decision for that family. And I would absolutely support that. Anybody who's listened to these broadcasts before knows that I'm a huge supporter and proponent of tough love. I think that this illness is a devastating illness that does end in jails, institutions, and death. It's an illness that doesn't mess about. I think it does want people dead. That's when we talk about rock bottom, the ultimate rock bottom is death, and this illness kills many of the people who have it. That's the stark reality. It used to be that those people died in their 50s and 60s, maybe even 70s if they're alcoholics. Excuse me, but it was the addiction that ultimately destroyed their health and well-being and killed them. I would say that actually their hearts and their connection to themselves and their ability to love and be loved died many, many years before they physically died, because addiction shuts you down to such an extent that you become like, my brother said to me the week before I went into rehab that when he looked in my eyes, it was like looking into the eyes of a zombie, that I wasn't there. And that's absolutely true. I felt completely spiritually dead. And I was physically still pretty good because I was only 32, but I was emotionally, mentally, spiritually bankrupt, dead, over. Anyway, going back to what family members can do to support. It's possible for families to let go and to not have anything to do with the addict, but to not close your heart to them, one of the things that's very, very sad to me living in Los Angeles, I live just off Melrose Avenue, which is a nice area of Los Angeles, and just literally on my doorstep I personally know about 20 to 30 homeless people who are out there. I know them, some by name, certainly I know a lot by face, because they're just there, they live there. And there are thousands and thousands of homeless people on the streets of Los Angeles, and many of these people are people who have addictions and who have mental health problems. Quite often they have dual diagnosis, which is a combination of the two, but many of them are addicts, and a lot of them are cannabis addicts, and that's completely undiagnosed, untreated. The health complications from cannabis use are being completely missed in this whole legalization agenda. The homeless people are off the radar. Nobody's looking at them and what the reality of cannabis is for those people. But anyway, these are people often whose family have cut them out and pushed them away and closed the door on them a long, long time before. And I'm not going to judge those families, because I know just how painful it is and how abusive an addict can be. When you've had your wedding ring stolen, when you've had somebody break into their own grandmother's house, or when you've had somebody who's sexually violated and abused another family member when they've been in active addiction, it's very easy to shut the door and say, don't ever come back, we don't want to see you again. Or when you're just absolutely fed up because your life has been dominated by somebody just being drunk every night and not being available, not showing up, not taking part in life. It's very easy to just want to push that person out the door and say goodbye. And oftentimes also I think it's true to say that people don't realise that addiction is an illness, it's a mental illness, and we don't view it in the way that we view other illnesses. And I absolutely do view it in the way that I view other illnesses. It's a chronic illness, and relapse is part of its chronic nature. Now, having said that, it is possible, very possible, with the right help and support, for somebody to get clean, to get sober, and stay clean and sober for years and years and years, if not the rest of their life. And again, the great thing about, for me, being in Los Angeles is there are people here with 40, 50 years of sobriety. It's not uncommon for people here to get into recovery in their teenage years, even like 14, 15, 16 years old, to get into recovery because they get access to teenage rehabs and good resources like addiction therapists who know what they're doing, and for those people to get clean and stay clean. Now, oftentimes those young people are people who have got parents who are addicts who are in recovery, so they've got parents who understand the illness and spot the symptoms very quickly and can help that young person address it. I'm just going to have a little sip of water. Please excuse me for 1 second. So I understand why it's tempting to kick that person out, but I really urge families, yes, do what you need to do to look after yourselves. Yes, don't compromise your health and well-being anymore. Yes, go out there and get support for yourselves and for other family members. You know, maybe the brothers and sisters of the addict will need to go to therapy themselves because of things they've been exposed to. If you can't afford personal therapy for your family members, look to see if there are any free therapeutic resources in your community. Most good schools should have at least one therapist. And to any teachers or head teachers who are watching this broadcast, I urge you to please spend some of your budget on therapy. It will pay you back very quickly in terms of lost school days. I would say to you, and I was that addict in the classroom who was enormously disruptive and disrespectful to teachers, and I was that person who would take hostages to come and use with me, and give other people cannabis and give other people other drugs because I didn't want to use on my own because I felt so lonely, and I felt so lonely in myself that a big part of my desire to use was to feel connection with other people. So I was that young person. I know what that young person's like. There is one of those young people in every classroom, if not more. This illness affects at least 1 in 10 of the population, and I would say that's increasing when we factor in things like pornography addiction, computer game addiction, internet addiction, exercise addiction. The pressure on young people around body is so huge. It's off the scale compared to what my generation and parents' generations were. In terms of self-harming and eating disorders, these are chronic, even in the best schools in the world. And I've worked with pupils from those schools, which cost thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds per term. Addiction is endemic in those places. It's endemic across culture and society, and it's really worth investing in treatment resources, because one person with an addiction can cost so much in terms of resources down the line, and also that one person can cause a lot of damage to a classroom, to a community, to a family. So it's really, really important to invest in recovery. Now I'm just going to have a quick look through this list, because I've got a great list of things that we might want to cover today. And in terms of that point about family members and what family members can do, compassion is so important. I was saying how this is an illness like other illnesses. I would urge people to think about how somebody with an illness like cancer is treated, or somebody who's broken their leg. The kind of compassion, the kind of sensitivity that's extended to that person. Addiction is not a pretty illness. It's something that people tend to think the person brought on themselves. There's a lot of blame attached to people who have addictions, because people who don't have addictions quite often say, well, why don't they just stop? This is crazy. Can't they see what they're doing to themselves? Can't they see how their mother is being heartbroken by what's going on? Well, of course they can't see that because they've got denial, or they can see it and they don't care because they're so emotionally crippled by this illness already, or just the desire to use is so strong that they will use no matter what they can see and feel. The self-centeredness of the illness will mean that they will use regardless of all of that stuff. So when I talk about having compassion, how that compassion may show up is just in terms of maybe letting go of the person now, giving them giving them access to resources, giving them suggestions for places that they can go for help. For anybody struggling with an alcohol problem, AA is a free resource that's all around the world. There are meetings that you can just Google. They're completely free. They're run informally by people who are in recovery themselves. So any alcoholic can go to an AA meeting. There's no reason why they can't. Anybody with a drug addiction, Narcotics Anonymous is there for you around the world. It's a free fellowship. So what compassion might look like, it might be putting that in the mail to the person that you love, or leaving that around the house, or this book here. Sorry, I've got all the books on my desk today, just because I'm aware that we can only cover so much, and you might well want to go and do some reading, then send me some questions for the next session. This book is fantastic. I've mentioned it before. Hi. Love First by Jeff and Deborah J. This book will tell you all about addiction in families, and come up with some very good tools for you to be able to use to do interventions. It's recommended that you hire a professional interventionist, but if you can't afford that, you can educate yourself about what an intervention is. You can learn about boundary setting, you can learn about consequences, you can learn about the things I've been talking about, detaching with love, and you can learn about what you can do to support that person into recovery. I just had somebody say on Periscope that they're going out with an alcoholic, and it is so tough. Loving somebody with this illness is difficult. I mean, what I would say is that often alcoholics and addicts have a lot going for them as people. As I said, they tend to be intelligent, they tend to be naturally very sensitive people, but when the illness is active, as you've just said to me on Periscope, it is ugly. When the person is in their illness, it is ugly, and it can manifest in really disgusting symptoms. And again, thank you that person. I can't catch your first name, but it is important, and that's a great point actually. It is really important as a loved one to separate in your mind the difference between the addict part of the person that you love and the real person, because it is like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation, and Mr. Hyde, it takes over as the addiction progresses. Hi Rachel, thank you for sharing that. What I would say to you, Rachel, and to anybody else who is dating an alcoholic, is it's absolutely imperative that you go out there and get support for yourself. Go to Al-Anon. That's a great family support group for people who are involved in an alcoholic. If it's a family member, then go to ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, or if it's your parents. It's really important that you find other people who are in this situation who can share with you and give you support around this, because you can't do it on your own. And what I will say to you, if you are in a situation with an addict in your family and you will develop codependency, you may not have been codependent to start with, although I suspect you probably were, which is why you're dating an alcoholic or an addict in the first place. But even if you started from a point of having good self-worth and good boundaries, dating an alcoholic or an addict in active addiction can really warp your sense of what's right for you and looking after yourself. And so it's really important that you address your own codependency. And this is a fantastic starting place. This is the seminal text for people wanting to learn about codependency. It's tricky to get your head around. It's quite a complex. It manifests in every single person in a different way, a unique way. So even this book probably won't speak to everybody who picks it up, because it's Melody Beattie's perspective on it. But you can also go online and start reading about codependency. There's another good book called Facing Codependency by Pia Melody, which is really worth looking at. I have one other book that I really want to put forward today, and we just have not very long. We've got a couple of minutes left. So this book here is written by a colleague and friend of mine, David Smallwood. He's one of the best therapists in the world. Lovely man who's been in recovery. I can't remember exactly how many years, something like 25 years himself. What I love about this book, sorry, I'm just reading something somebody's writing. Oh, thank you, Rachel, for sharing that. What I love about this book is it really understands that the addiction from a kind of holistic perspective, all of those different symptoms that I've talked about today, and it kind of makes the connections between them. Also, David is an out gay man, and I talked about 1 in 10 of the population having an addiction. In the LGBTQI community, it's much higher than that. It's as many as a quarter, if not more, I would say, as the apps have fueled sex addiction, you know, things like Grindr and Gaydar and things like that. So this is a very, very good book to read for anybody struggling with an addiction themselves or wanting to understand addiction. There's another good book by a guy called Craig Nacken called The Addictive Personality, which really helps. Now, I couldn't go today talking about relapse and relapse prevention without mentioning this gentleman, Terence Gorski. This is not a book about relapse, this is a book about understanding the 12 steps, and so that's a good book for anybody in recovery who's struggling with understanding the 12 steps and how they work to help people get clean and stay clean. But Gorski is the world expert really on relapse, or he's the guy who's devoted so much of his life to looking at relapse. And so that question that came in earlier about what are the signs of relapse, Gorski's your man. Go out and have a look at Gorski. He will help you understand relapse in a way that few others can. Really lovely gentleman, American man. I've met him a few times, and really lovely man. I'm just having a quick look through this list that was sent to me just to make sure that we are covering all the bases. Okay, well, we're not going to cover all the bases because we only had 50 minutes, but I want you to know that you can send me any questions that you haven't felt able to ask here today to me at sarahgrahamsolutions.com. sarahgrahamsolutions@gmail.com. sarahgrahamsolutions@gmail.com. I'm also available on Twitter at Addiction Expert. You can, if you follow me and say you want to send me a question or just want to clarify something I've said today, follow me and say that you heard this broadcast, and I will follow you back, and then you can DM me to keep that nice and anonymous. I hope that everybody out there now knows about lettingthelightin.com. Letting the Light In, as I said at the beginning of this, is a fantastic resource for parents and for anybody who is interested in addiction and recovery, but especially for parents and carers, because it's written from a parent's perspective. That's a great resource. Please go and check that out. Show them some love. Follow them on Twitter. It's something that's being funded completely by this parent just because they want to give back. And there's no financial agenda to that at all. You're not going to have anybody trying to sell you anything. I give my time to this for free because I'm aware that I'm very lucky to be in recovery myself. For 15 years I had access to the best resources in the world because I was financially able to do that, and I know that many people struggling with this illness do not have anything like those opportunities and chances. So I like to give my time doing this for free, and I like to give time each week to help people who don't have the resources, because I personally believe that everybody, no matter what financial background, should have access to good recovery. And you know, I've seen so many people who other people thought were lost causes, people who would never ever get clean. I have had the privilege of working with some of those people who have got clean and who've gone on to have amazing lives. I have personal friends who are people who are homeless, street junkies and prostitutes, and who today are clean and sober and happy and contributing to society and paying their taxes and dealing with the trauma of where their addiction took them. So there is hope for anybody. Don't ever let anybody say to you that there's no hope for this person. There is always hope. There is always hope, and you never know what that one thing will be that will unlock the door that will help that person find recovery. Yeah, and it might be very late in the day. It might be that they've even got a life-threatening illness and that they're not physically going to recover from the cirrhosis or whatever it is. But I think that everybody should have the right to be able to get clean and stand a chance of dying sober and dying with integrity, and get one of the things that's so beautiful about recovery, and I feel myself getting emotional about this because I'm going to have a little cry. I didn't have the opportunity to get sober in time for my dad dying. My dad died in 2001 and it was partly his death that actually motivated me into recovery. Of course, I'm in that position. I can never make amends to him for all of the things that I put him through. But what I can do, and what anybody in recovery can do, when you get sober is to make that living amends to your family by staying sober, by not picking up, and by living a worthwhile life that contributes. I personally have a spiritual belief that my father, is up there somewhere, and I know that he's proud of me. That's my personal spiritual belief. Some people have put off the 12 steps. I know I'm going over time here, but I'm sorry. I know that I've been a bit sort of around the houses today, so I'm just going to say a couple more things. I know some people have put off the 12 steps because they think it's God and they think it's going to be religious, and they're not down with that, and I understand that. I was very, very anti-God and religion, being queer, having come out when I was 17. The last thing I wanted to do was go somewhere with a homophobic old chap on a cloud with a hippie son. That was not my idea of fun. I was cool. There was no way I was going to hang out in dodgy church rooms talking about God. But what I would say to you about the 12-step programs is they are not telling you that you have to have a religious God. You can change God to higher power. You can change God to group of drunks. The fundamental spiritual principle is that you can't do this on your own. Addiction is about loneliness and isolation. The illness wants you on your own, so it can manipulate you and get you to do whatever it likes, and it wants you to die, as I said. So the opposite of that is community and connection with other people, and love and fellowship and giving back. And that giving back is what keeps people in recovery sober. We keep what we have by giving it away. So although I'm, to one sense, being altruistic today, giving this time, I'm also helping my own recovery by helping others. And that's why we do what we do. I know that we've got to close. I'm just thinking if there's anything else that my heart really needs to tell you today. No, that feels good. I hope that has been helpful to you guys. I hope that you'll let your friends and family members know about the work that we do on letting the light in. And again, I'm not doing this for money. I'm actually doing very minimal work with clients these days because I'm doing my own personal creative work, which is, I'm an intersex person, and I'm trying to do creative work around being intersex to lessen the shame around being intersex for other people in the world. So, please trust that there are good people out there. There is a whole business in the addiction world, and there are certainly people in America making a lot of money from addiction, and I don't have a problem with that as long as they're providing good services. But there are also many, many people working in this field who are completely heart-based, who want everybody to have the chance of recovery, and I hope that you find some of those people to work with, and I hope that you find some of those people to be your friends and your supporters and the people that you can call when you're feeling absolutely awful and like this nightmare is never going to end. Believe me, it can end, and your family can recover. And even if the addict doesn't get well, and even if the addict dies, you as families can heal from this yourselves. That addict didn't become an addict in isolation. This is a family illness. Everybody in the family is affected by addiction. Everybody in the family needs to get into some kind of recovery. I'm not saying that other people in the family all need to stop drinking or even all need to stop taking drugs. There might be other people in the family who casually use drugs, and I'm not lecturing or telling anybody what they need to do. I'm just saying that if addiction is harming you, or if somebody else's addiction is harming you, you can get well no matter what the addict does. And that can be very difficult to hear, especially if the addict is facing death or dies. People can think, I'm never going to recover from this. And believe me, I was lucky to work with the Winehouse family a little bit and help them set up the Amy Winehouse Foundation. And in the one session I did with Mitch Winehouse that we did on camera for his documentary, the message I had to give him was around alcohol. The fact that Amy had put down drugs but she hadn't put down alcohol, and people go into denial and think, oh well, they're not doing that, which was the thing that was the problem, they're just doing this. Well, any single area of addiction can kill the person directly or take them back to the original addiction. So it's vital that you get into holistic recovery. And I suppose one thing I should tell you is I have a pamphlet that I wrote called A Guide to Holistic Addiction and Recovery. I'm very happy to send that to anybody for free that describes my perspective on that. Please just send me your email and I'll send that to you. And I also want to give a big shout out to the charity in the UK, Action on Addiction. They very kindly supported our social media for this event today. Action on Addiction is a charity that I absolutely love. Partly I love them because they have the wonderful rehab Clouds House in Wiltshire, where I've sent clients, and I've sent clients to them as paying clients, and I've also sent people to them who didn't have the resources, and they have some charity beds. And my best friend, his brother, was dying from his addiction in the state system. He was in prison for his heroin addiction, and this boy, if he'd have stayed in the state system, would have died. They were keeping him on methadone, and it was a horrible, horrible situation. Clouds House took that young man in and got him clean, and that boy is now doing his masters and is going to become an addiction therapist. So that's what recovery can do for people. And there are good resources out there like Action on Addiction who will help you if you don't have resources. So do not feel that there is no hope. There really is hope. And I'm going to try and cheer up for this last bit because I actually do feel really happy about addiction and recovery. I'm still grieving my father, obviously. I think anybody who's lost a parent knows that that is one of those things that takes a very long time to heal, and that's okay. I would much rather be Freudian slip. I would much rather be speaking those feelings and feeling those feelings than drinking and drugging myself to death. And that's recovery in action. And I'm going to leave it there today. Hope this was good for you and hope to connect with you next time. Thank you everybody for joining us.